Welcome everybody, I'm Santiago Kneeland and this is The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the long way home. So in every spiritual journey, we have a beginning. It begins somewhere. For some, it's in certainty. For others, it's in doubt. Today's story begins with a little boy who walked out of the church, convinced he could never believe in the God he had just heard about. Our guest is J.J. Johnson, author, former U.S. State Department Foreign Service Specialist, past president of the Grand Canyon Urantia Book Society, and lifelong student of the Urantia Book. Throughout a distinguished career with the U.S. State Department, serving in diplomatic assignments from Islamabad and Moscow to Beijing and Washington, J.J. discovered that the greatest journey wasn't across continents, but within. Because sometimes the longest road is the one that finally brings us home. So welcome, J.J. It's a pleasure having you here.
Santiago, well, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be with you and your listeners.
Thanks a lot. And it's an interesting topic, and I want to get right to it because we have an interesting story of a life story. So let's begin with the first segment. So the boy who walked out. For every seeker's story has a beginning. And for JJ, it started with fear, a childhood experience that caused him to reject religion before he could truly understand God. But sometimes walking away is simply the first step towards discovering a deeper truth. So tell us, JJ, in this explanation that you're going to give us about the long way home, what was your personal experience in this walking out of your church?
Well, Santiago, that's an excellent place to start. Thanks for bringing it up in that manner. Well, I guess I could say I didn't walk out of the church. I ran out of the church at 5 years old. And so it was more like I scared the living daylights out of me. I was born in Kentucky, and I grew up the first few years on my grandparents' farm, Mama and Papa, I called them, and they had a tabernacle. They had a church on their property. And so the priest or the itinerant preacher would come once a week and give a sermon at the church. Of course, it was the fire and brimstone, the scary stuff. And at 5 years old, you can only imagine. But it's amazing, Santiago. At 5 years old, like I said, it scared the daylights out of me. And one of the sermons, I just ran out of the church and went out into this open field and spread my legs at 5 years old. I say 5 years old because they didn't have kindergarten in those days back in the early 50s in Kentucky. So I'm pretty sure I was 5 years old. But I spread my legs and I had to make this affirmation. I was sincere as a heartbeat. And I spread my legs because I thought I was going to get hit by a bolt of lightning. But I had to say it. I had to say it. I can't believe in God. And so, of course, looking back on it and after my spiritual experiences later on in life, which I'll get into, if that's what God was all about, I really didn't care to have any part of that. It disturbed my inner peace. And so because of that, Santiago, I was, I guess you could say the best description was I was an agnostic. I wasn't an atheist. I mean, who am I to say there's no God? I just didn't know, and I wanted proof. I couldn't have living faith like a lot of people have, and it's real. Living faith motivates people. You can tell the fruits they bear, and it's a real thing. But I for some reason, my makeup or whatever it was, I wanted proof. I wanted some sort of an experience, a personal experience. And I knew if there was a God, it had to be a loving Heavenly Father. And sooner or later, God will give me whatever experience I needed to confirm that. I never really gave it much thought after that in the beginning because I left it at that. And I didn't, so it wouldn't disturb my inner peace. But there was a void there. There was a spiritual void. So jumping ahead, I went from 5 years old till I was 22 out of the Marines. I was in the Marines for 4 years. And when I got out of the Marines, I was back in Chicago area and still had that inner peace, but I had no spiritual attachment to it. So there was, it left me searching because it didn't fill the complete void. And sure enough, Santiago, when I was 22, I had my spiritual experience. I guess you could call it born again, spiritual transformation, whatever way someone identifies with that. And I could go in and talk of the logistics of where I was at and everything illuminated around me. There was this loving presence, a loving presence that manifested itself. It was real. And this presence, this love, it's almost a contradiction in terms, Santiago. This loving presence it's hard to say it, but it got more loving. I didn't have to go, gee, give me more proof, but for some reason, I can't describe it in words. But this loving presence communicated to me, not in words, but it communicated that achieved the same purpose, but it was more pure, that there's a loving Heavenly Father. So finally, at 22, for the first time in my life, I was able to make spiritual decisions, or decisions of a spiritual nature. Because when I loved hearing about Christians and people that had, they were on fire, and I just loved listening to them. But I just sat there like this, didn't do anything for me other than appreciating their story. But after after my spiritual experience, transformed by whatever spiritual transformation, whatever way people want to describe it, finally I was able to draw upon insight to make decisions for myself. So then I was on track. I knew there was a loving Heavenly Father. I had a personal spiritual experience that validated it for me. And so at 22, I was still searching. I didn't have the details. I mean, where are we going to go after we die, if anywhere?
But you had this experience, right? You had a starting point. I mean, and I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, but just to clear this up, you had this experience, but now you had the will and the volition to seek this spiritual information, let's say.
Exactly. I was,
Okay.
I had the experience, but it kept me then really want to search for the truth of reality. I wanted to know the details, but
Yeah.
I had really the main thing that I was searching for. Is there a God? But now I wanted a spiritual insight into more about God, a loving Heavenly Father. And I didn't have the details because I was relying solely on my spiritual experience, which was was solid and right on. So I kept searching at 22 for more information to not validate, but to build up on the spiritual experience I had.
So let's stop right there, because I mean, this is a really interesting story, I think. And before you tell us how that that path or that journey continued from that, let's just talk a little bit on how what happened when you were a kid. And this is interesting, especially at such a young age, to be able to recognize or to understand that what's happening is not right, and that presentation was, to my understanding, how you described it, was just going against your nature, what was being presented, and how you were rejecting, and that's how you said that there's no God, so what was.
I didn't say there's no God. I just said I couldn't believe in God.
Yeah, correct. You
To me,
couldn't
there was a
believe
big
in.
difference. I was never so bold or arrogant or whatever. So I just agnostic, I guess you could say.
Correct. So I'm wondering, because there's some children, that have this from a very young age. You have this spiritual, let's say, connection or insight. So in your case, I'm wondering, what was it that got you to be so against, or that be so abhorrent to you? I don't know what was the situation.
Excellent question, Santiago. And of course, I think about it myself quite a bit. But I'm thinking, 5 years old, I reject what I'm being exposed to, evolutionary from those days in the 50s with the hell and damnation and the negative stuff that would scare me. But for some reason, I had this inner spirit, this inner peace. So that's what kept me going all the time until I had my spiritual experience. But I had nothing to attach to identify my inner peace with anything else, because I didn't know if there was a God or not. But that peace, I knew that I had that, and I knew I was not going to let go of that, because I thought to myself, why can't everyone have this peace that passes all understanding?
And that's beautiful, because I mean, you weren't you weren't dependent on somebody external, some authority to tell you and to teach you. So what happened in this time, from that moment to when you started your spiritual journey or your spiritual quest? Did you have like a spiritual or like a Christian structure, or what was because I imagine you would have had all that structure.
Well, my personal approach I knew I had the inner peace, which to me was the
Mm-hmm.
most important thing for me at that time. And I knew that was solid. But there was a void there. There was a spiritual void. I didn't know if there was a God or not. So I had this thirst, thirsty for truth, thirsty to.
Okay.
So that kept driving me, it kept me with a curiosity. So anytime I met anyone that had whatever religion or spiritual experiences they had, I was curious about it. But it took me until I had that void until I was 22 years old to actually know for myself, for my own
Got
experience,
it.
to be able to finally have that spiritual birthday, spiritual transformation.
That's it. That's interesting. And let me just throw this story because I have and I always mention this. I have a similar story that I mean I was raised Catholic and yeah, and I got to a point, although it did give me some structure and the understanding of God. There were many things, especially the dogmas and the authority and the fear. Let's say, and you're probably commenting on it or that you're mentioning similar to that, but that never made case of it. I don't know. It was like something that I just kind of just disregarded it. Didn't although I understood it, but never really made an impact on me. So maybe we had something that was beyond taking us beyond those structures and those limits. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I uh, I enjoyed listening to born again Christians, the Buddhism, the different evolutionary religions, and as Jesus would say, I think that they all have truth. There's truths in all the religions,
Yeah,
and to the extent that it brings an individual closer to God and God closer to that individual, then to that extent it's worthwhile. But I
yeah,
could not, out of all my searching until I was 22. Or no, at 22 is when I had my spiritual transformation. So from there until 28, those 6 years, I was searching. I could not identify with anything that I could relate to wholeheartedly, 100%. That I can say, okay, my personal spiritual experience identifies as and consistent with what I ran across, and of course that gets me to the Urantia book when I was 28.
you were like a spiritual vagabond, let's say, taking going here and there and taking little bits of everywhere, but not a home yet. Let's say.
There you go. Yeah, I wasn't
Okay.
giving, I wanted the full answer. I mean, if there's a God, I want details if I can find them. And I could not find any source that was brought to my attention or I found on my own, from my spiritual experience. Cause I had that gift finally for myself to be able to make decisions. I can say, oh, that's cool. And I go, ooh,
Okay. Yeah.
can't quite buy into,
Discernment.
that it's not consistent with my understanding of
Uh,
my spiritual growth.
so what happened now that you said you had this journey and you started looking and you got to this point and what happens afterwards?
Oh, this is really cool. Yeah. Never get tired of sharing it. P- individuals like you and I and other students in the Urantia community, one of the first questions out of our mouth, how'd you find the book? What was your experience?
Yeah.
So people love, and I'm so glad you're having this podcast, and along with others that are doing it now and who are computer literate. And as you know me, I need help. And so we're cooking with propane now with this. We're growing spiritually big time compared
Yeah.
to back in the 50 years ago. But what happened for me, Santiago, in my search to wanting if there's more out there, and I was able to, I felt comfortable taking on anything. Well, oh, you're into this, you're into Edgar Casey, whatever they were into. Let me take a look at it, and I'd go, ugh, and then I would not embrace it wholeheartedly. I'd see the truths in
Mm-hmm.
all the religions, but nothing I could accept wholeheartedly. So here's the big story for me. So 22, then after the Marines, had that spiritual transformation, a birthday in Chicago, and then I've been working overseas. I'm a gypsy at heart. I found positions in the Marshall Islands. This is before the State Department, in the Northwest
Okay.
Territories in Canada and things like that. So I'm meeting people around the world, and I'm asking, searching, still wanting more. I want more information spiritually that I can accept wholeheartedly. So I'm on Kwajalein, the Marshall Islands, between Hawaii and Guam. I leave Kwaj, and I settle in Hawaii.
Okay.
And after about a week or so, a friend of mine, he's in the snail mail days, he writes me a letter and he says, JJ, and he mentions the Urantia book in the first or second paragraph. And I'm thinking, what the heck is Urantia, and because he was a geek, he was a computer kind of guy, and the only thing I could think of Urantia, maybe it's some computer magazine that and I'm thinking to myself, why does Bill Ibera want to mention some computer thing to me when he knows I'm not interested in stuff like that? But here's an unusual thing that happened to me. When I saw the word Urantia, my hand reached over to pick up the phone to find the Urantia book. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck's going on? But the urge was so powerful, I didn't resist it. But I'm thinking, this is not me. So I picked it up.
It was like an involuntary reflex thing.
Sort of, yeah. It's you're familiar with the corporeal staff, that they got the human side got directed to go. I've always wondered how they do that. But anyway, for me in Hawaii, as I'm picking up the phone and I'm thinking all along, like you say, if this reflex thing, I knew it wasn't just let me check this out. It was too powerful. So I didn't resist it, not knowing this is what the outcome would be. So anyway, I called the bookstores, and the Honolulu bookstore downtown had a copy of the Urantia book. So I run down there when I got off my business that I was starting, and it was like, I don't know, 20-some. They didn't have soft copies back in those days. They had the hard copy. Of course, I didn't have the money to pay for it, so I charged it on my charge card, $20-some or whatever it was. So that started my next journey. Spiritual transformation, 22, searching, and finally found something, the Urantia book, of course, the Urantia Revelation, that is consistent with what I know to be true from my personal experience.
Okay. So this is interesting. In the whole point of this podcast is the long way home and finding this and how this process. So before we move into what you found and what is the purpose, I mean the takeaway in all this, can you summarize or any takeaway that you or not takeaway, but anything that you want to mention before we move in this journey? Let's talk about your journey that you want to point out, and especially for someone that's here listening for the first time and that's probably the same thing as you. They hear something and that resonates, that doesn't. There's truth in here and there's none, but does not embrace a religion, because that's important. You do not have to embrace a religion per se, which is what happened to you. So what can you tell to somebody in that sense that they're searching and they haven't found, that information or that maybe experience that you're talking about?
That's an excellent segue to Santiago. So basically, when I finally settled down with the Urantia book and noticed it wasn't a computer thing, it was so voluminous, as you know, 2,097-page letter from God, not knowing that yet. So this voluminous Urantia book, when I get back to my apartment in downtown Honolulu, I see how thick it. I think, well, based upon everything else that's been brought to my attention these last 6 years, I didn't make a final decision, of course. I hadn't opened the book yet. But I thought it's going to be like anything else. I'll find little bits and gems in there that I'll appreciate, but I'm not going to spend my whole time devouring over 2,000 pages. That was my initial thinking. But I did not.
I think everybody comes up to it as a skeptic.
Exactly. Honest, doubting Thomas, but sincere.
Yes.
And, but I had my spiritual experience, so I had something to draw upon. So I knew, I just assumed that it's probably going to be like all the other sources the last 6 years, that it's something I'm not going to wholeheartedly embrace, but I didn't know that. And fortunately, I started from the forward, and that's my story, and I can got more detail.
That's a good way good part to stop, because that's interesting. And I started from the forward as myself as well. So we're gonna go dive deep into what you found. So stick around, and we'll find more. In this second segment in our conversation with J.J. Johnson in The Long Way Home, we're going to be rediscovering Jesus and what is the information and what is the truth that J.J. found. So finding the Urantia book wasn't the end of J.J.'s search. It was the beginning of a completely new worldview. In this segment, we'll explore how science and spirituality stopped competing, how Jesus became more real than ever, and why truth doesn't ask us to choose between faith and reason. So, JJ, tell us, what did you find in this part of your life and in this book?
Santiago, I've been very blessed. And like you, I started from the forward. Because one of the main reasons was, who am I to figure that thick of a book? They have a reason for having it in that kind of sequence. I didn't know what it was, but I'm not going to, outguess them. And so
I won't
started.
argue against it. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe something that's, in my case, it was something that they're really too complicated to understand. I say, okay, I'll probably get it later. So, but yeah, I understand. It's overwhelming.
exactly. And so I started from the forward, and initially thinking I'm going to find something inconsistent, like I have with the previous
Yeah,
search that I've had. But I did, again, I don't prejudge. I didn't, that's what I assumed would happen, but I kept an open mind, I think. I feel I did. And, well, by the way, even though you and I, Santiago, started from the forward, if new students or anyone asks me, where should I start? It's been my experience over the years, over many study groups globally and here in the U.S. If I'm asked that question, I say, well, the table of contents is what, 400 and some pages. I mean, the table of contents itself, if you're interested in the Lucifer rebellion or free will or the life and teachings of Jesus,
yeah,
you can go through there if that's the way you want to approach it and see what hits your hot button and get familiar with what you already know or curious about. However,
yeah,
I always end it by saying that my my recommendation is that's a lot of people do that, and that's fine. However, at some point, if it really resonates with you, at some point, whether it's a year or two or longer, you'll want to start from the forward because
yeah,
they give reasons for that. But you and I
yeah,
just happen to start from the forward.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so basically, like you, the forward was above my pay grade. I didn't find anything inconsistent, and there are a couple of gems in there that kept me going. When I finally go, oh, my head's going to burst, but they'd always say something really, really resonates. You say, okay, I'll keep going. So I just left it. I couldn't say it wasn't true, and the things they did say that I understood is right on. However, when I got to paper one on page 24. Here's what happened. This is what changed my life another way regarding my personal spiritual experience. The one I told you 6 years prior, when
Uh-huh.
everything illuminated around me and the loving presence manifested itself and communicated. People used to say, well, JJ, tell me about your experience. Well, that doesn't do anything for anyone. Everyone has their own personal experience other than just,
True, true.
appreciating a good story. So here's what I identify with now. If someone says, well, JJ, what happened to you? What it mentions in paper one on page 24 in the foundation printing, it said, those who know God have experienced the fact of his presence. Such God-knowing mortals hold in their personal experience the only positive proof of the existence of the living God which one human being can offer to another. And I said, finally, if someone asks me, JJ, what, I say, well, this is what I identify with. This is what I know happened to me. And I know no human in and of themselves could have written that by themselves. So page 24, I was hooked right away. I didn't make a decision on the whole book because I hadn't read it yet. I read the book the first time in 6 weeks, cover to cover. I had free
Really?
had free time. I wasn't married. My two sons were not, I wasn't there yet. So I had the free time to do that. And so, anyway, that's the approach I had.
Well, that's very interesting, JJ, and you found a definition straight away, and that's, I think, one of the things that also is so meaningful to me and to many EV readers is, the clarity that it brings to some concepts, maybe to something like you're saying, this certainty about the experience that you had, and like you're saying, it's your experience, and I've had many different let's say intensities of spiritual experiences, but nonetheless they're yours. But that certainty that you're mentioning, of it belongs to you and you cannot explain it. I have a good example, or something that I like to do, when I'm having a conversation with somebody that's doubtful, about God and everything. And, I say, well, how do you know? They ask me, how know, God exists? I say, well, I can feel him. Well, really, you can't feel it. I mean, you can't see him. So I said, well, close your eyes and give me your hand. and I start touching and just playing with her hand. So what am I doing? You're touching me. So how can you know if you don't see me? If you're not seeing it, because I feel you. It's the same thing. It's a different type. It's not physical, but it is a presence. It's something that you feel, and I can relate to your story in that sense. So now that you found this and you started looking into the Urantia book, and many things are rediscovering or redefining, which is what happened to me in my case. I rediscovered Jesus in the extension that he was, the great, the full extent of what he was. What is it that you find in this part of Jesus, in this rediscovering Jesus that you're talking about?
Well, by the way, I like that metaphor, that example you use about touching and close your eyes. You
Isn't
got
it
some good
good?
ones.
Yeah,
I'm going to use it,
yeah,
so I'll,
yeah,
I'll give
yeah.
you credit if they ask me. But I borrow from everybody, and that's
No
a good
worries.
one.
I don't remember whom I got it from, but I was in my teenage years, and it was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, Santiago, a lot of truth seekers and people that discover the Urantia book, they gravitate fairly quickly to part 4, which is
Mm-hmm.
understandable, the life and teachings of Jesus. And I like to state it, it's the life example and personal teachings of Jesus. And so that loving presence, the way Jesus lived his life as a son of man, in addition, after baptism, being the Son of God and Son of Man, and the way they just reveal his life on the planet, it's just I can see why a lot of people gravitate to that, and it resonates. But I was left with a dilemma in the beginning because I'm reading sequentially, and I was looking forward to part 4, but I
You
wanted
weren't
to.
there.
I
Yeah.
wasn't there yet. So prior to that, everything was consistent with truth, beauty, and goodness.
Okay.
It had that it was consistent with truth, beauty, and goodness. And we describe it nowadays, it's a transcendent literary masterpiece. I challenge anyone, if you're thirsty for truth and you're curious, if you're not familiar with your Urantia book, then it's something I would recommend. Then it's a personal experience. You got to decide for yourself. I'll leave it at that. But so when I had my personal experience, Santiago, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Not everyone has a personal experience like that. They're God conscious through living faith. So I'm thinking
Okay.
now, so I'm thinking to myself, well, God doesn't love me more than anyone else, or vice versa. So what about the folks, the Christians and other religions and people that are spiritual, and they believe in God, and they don't have an experience of their own, like similar to like I had? It's the
Mm-hmm.
living faith. And that's why at the end of 2097 pages, the Urantia book uses the word otherwise. Otherwise, the experience of faith is the assurance of God consciousness. So in my mind's eye, there are two ways we can become God conscious. Experience the fact of the Father's presence like I did. Otherwise, the experience of faith, and that's equally real. They both achieve the same purpose. And when they talk about faith, you're talking about living faith, the experience of
Yeah.
faith, the assurance of faith, the conviction of faith. And that's what Jesus did as a son of man. He lived his life as if in the presence of the Father by living faith. And we can all do that in this day and age. And we draw up on the spiritual insight of our indwelling spirit, and able to access that with our free will, and recognize, why should someone shut their eyes when truth is knocking at the door? So it's one of those that are ready and curious and searching for truth. Uh, no matter how poorly I describe it or eloquently someone just mentions the Urantia book, if they're ready for it, they're going to do like we did. They're going to check it out. If someone's not ready, no matter what you say, they're not ready. It's just can't do much
Yeah.
about it.
And what I always try to point out is that this isn't doing without or supplementing anything that you've already have in as a spiritual basis, as as your religion, because that's one of the things that we discuss and we present, the personal religion. It's that personal relationship. So really there's like you were saying, it's very personal. It's dependent on each one, but I like what you were saying about living faith, and this is very important because through this agency, I think, through this living faith, and faith requires courage. So that's why I want to bring this up, through this living faith of, trusting in that, if, like you're saying, if the universe is based and is constructed within truth, beauty, and goodness, as long as your will or your intentions are good will, then that you're trying to get the best and do the best, then there's going to be a good result. And that faith that you're putting in God, and not only just putting faith and taking back and letting God just do the work. You have to put in the work. You have to do that effort. It's putting that faith. I like a lot of the time what Jordan Peterson says. You have to have that faith, but you have to put that action. You have to put that intention and move that forward. So I think this is important in how you can reach that connection with God in this living faith as well.
Very good point. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, when we have the experience of faith, and we become God conscious in that manner, it motivates us. We experience the love of the Father within, and it's so powerful. We got to share it out. We can't. We don't feel. It doesn't feel right until we have that joy of free will loving service, and that's
Yeah.
why you see the folks that are on fire with it, because they had the experience, and they're not satisfied until they live it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I like that you pointed out, and there's different ways of exercising this, or service, and of doing service. And some can be very effusive, or very very out there, but there is a longing, as when you start to realize these truths, and all the fruits that you can get from this personal relationship with God, and sharing, and that's part of what the whole gospel, or the whole idea that that Jesus came to bring about God, his fatherhood and the brotherhood, and how we, in serving our brothers, and in bringing, just a little bit of our experience in sharing, and making, a little grain of sand in their experience, that is so fulfilling, and so enriching, for at least for me in my life, to share and to grow with our brethren.
Beautiful, yes, and this is a testament right now that what you're doing now, taking all these interviews, you're making it available. This is your gift that you have to me, along with Derek Samaras and Paula Thompson and the others that are now doing these interviews and podcasts. Is just getting the word out. So we have that desire to share the love, and this is just a wonderful way to do it. And by living faith, becoming God conscious, you can tell by the fruits they bear. It's spiritual, so they bear forth spiritual fruits. That's the proof in the pudding, and that kind of thing. And to me, it's exciting. I never get tired of being able to think of new ways to share that. And by the way, you're the first interview I'm having. Something big is coming up. I
Oh,
can't.
good. I'm happy. What an honor. I'm glad. Oh, because I think this is very important, and one of the things that we want to point out in these podcasts, and beyond just the what we find in information in the Urantia book, they're really universal truths. I mean, it's beyond the book. It's really universal, and it's factual, and it's God. So as we have these experiences, and we have these conversations, especially with someone like you, who's had this long story, and experiences from one pole to the other, it's really shows people that they can also relate. They find themselves in a similar situation, how they can find in the exercises, and not only going to the book, but in sincerely having that sincere heart. I think is very important. When you really open up and say, I want to receive God. And that's what happened to me, when I was in church, close to my 18, 19 years old. I got to a point that said, a lot of people here are trying to get away from the devil, and rather tend to come close to God. It was, if I check the box and I go once a week to the church, I'm not going to hell. But I wanted to have that connection. So in that sincere longing is that I found the book, and the book is, a huge tool in understanding that which is God and divinity.
Beautiful. Yes, exactly. And That's why we want to get the word out and share it so people can, truth seekers and people that are sincere, can have their own personal experience to relate, like you and I are sharing ours right now. They'll have their own to share. And when I was in
Yeah.
Hawaii, just backtracking, and I found the Urantia book was brought to my attention, reading it 50 pages a day sequentially. And I used to play chess down by the chess tables in Waikiki. I lived in Waikiki. I was single. Had a penthouse. Of course, I didn't have any
Okay.
money, so I'd rent out the other 2 bedrooms. And I mean, if I'd had $1 million, I couldn't have lived any better. And I go down and play chess at the chess tables, the speed chess, 5-minute games. And
Yeah.
I never won a game because those guys were rated and all of that. But anyway, the one of the chaps that I was playing chess with, he had the Urantia book as well, and he'd set it on the side of the chess table, and tourists that would walk by Waikiki by the beautiful weather and everything, and every now and then some tourists may look at him and say, "What's that book about?" or "What is that book?" And this guy would, under his breath, he would whisper where you could barely hear him. He'd say, "It's your answer book." And they say, "What'd you say?" And he says, "Oh, it's the Urantia book." So I've heard stories like that
Yeah.
that just
Yeah.
cracked me up over the years. I got plenty of those to share.
Yeah. Oh, an interesting. Wish I would have been there in those times in the 50s, playing chess in Hawaii. So it's an interesting story, JJ. So before we move to our next segment, anything you want to point out before we close in this part?
Well, you left us with, I've discovered the book. It took me page 24, and now I'm on the fast track. Can't wait to finish the whole thing. And again, I did not make my formal decision until I completed part 4. I mean, I assumed it was based upon my personal revelation was consistent with an epical revelation based
Okay.
upon what I just quoted you on page 24. So I can't imagine reading that voluminous book, and then at the very end it says, "Boy, did we pull the wool over your eyes, JJ, you silly boy. You thought you had AI down, whatever." But
Yeah. Yeah.
but anyway, that didn't happen, and I was on, and so I was just absorbing and learning and trying to grasp as much as I could in my first reading, and of course, I carried the book wherever I went. I had the one of the early third printing of the book. I wore the word OOK off the book because I carried it around like this. The BOOK, the OOK was worn off.
Yeah.
And just before we get into our next segment, real briefly, as in Waikiki, I'm carrying the book around everywhere. So excited, I'm overflowing, but that I still haven't read the whole thing. And this young man with a big beard walks up out of a pizza parlor in Waikiki, and he sees me with the Urantia book, even though I had the OOK worn off. He says, "Oh, you read the Urantia book?" That was my first encounter. You can imagine how excited I was. Finally, someone else knows
Yeah.
about this book. I always thought, am I the only person in the world that reads this, that found this book and recognizes what it is? Anyway, he says, "Oh, you read the Urantia book?" So I got excited real quick, of course. But he says, "I read it in one afternoon on Maui." And I'm
Really.
going, "What the heck? Was he on Maui Wowie? What do you mean?" So I knew right then there was going to be different levels of folks that found the book. But anyway, that was another funny stories like that throughout the 50 years.
No, that's and I bet there's a lot of stories. I mean, with all those, all that time, I think there's a lot of stories. But well, thanks for this part of the JJ. Now we're gonna move into to how we can live in this reality. So stick around. What is it? Living the truth of reality. In this segment, we're going to see that great ideas only matter if they change the way we live. We'll close by asking the most practical question of all. How do we bring these teachings into everyday life? Because spiritual transformation doesn't happen at all at once. It happens decision by decision, relationship by relationship, and one act of love after the other. So how can we live these truths? And especially, through all your history, and this is what I like about your story, and you've been really experiencing them, so you've been putting them to the test. What is it that, I mean, people can take from these truths? What are the truths or the fruits that people can live by?
Well, I guess I'll begin with Santiago that one of the major things that has been with me ever since I discovered the Urantia book is the quote where it said, "Revelation," which the Urantia book is an epical revelation. It states, "Revelation originates neither a science nor a religion. Its function is to coordinate both science and religion with the truth of reality." And that's
Okay.
always stuck with me 50 years ago. I recognized that right away. And so I was curious. There's not only a loving Heavenly Father that we can experience within, there's the impersonal nature of God, uh, 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 the cosmology and deity and all of that. So there's and a revelation coordinates those two with the truth, and that's the truth of reality. It's just not the personal and the impersonal. It's both of those together, coordinated by an epical revelation.
I like that, and let me before you move into the next things that you're going to bring to us. This is something that really was important to me in my search for God. What you're saying about the personal and the impersonal, and maybe for people that are just listening to this for the first time, the qualities of God, and because God is everything, so it's so everything applies, in a way. I really like this because when I stepped out of the Catholic Church, one of the things that really interested me was Native American traditions and the concept of the Great Spirit, and that personality less. It wasn't like in more the Western or the Judeo-Christian religions that we have, a personality. So it was really good for me to understand this. I always use the concept of the Force as the Star Wars presents us to us, and that is God. It is both things, the personality and the non-personal part of deity, right?
Exactly. And that, to me, that's a big thing. And younger people and people that they're not going to just accept prior teachings that doesn't match up with what they're learning and experiencing themselves.
True.
And so they keep searching. And that's what the Urantia book does. It answers those kinds of questions coherently, consistently, and always consistent with truth, beauty, and goodness, and very strong on the family life. So it's got the combination of all of those. And so that's what attracted me. And over the years, when I was with the State Department and prior to that, uh, you're talking about the impersonal nature of God. There are
Hmm.
numerous discoveries going on a daily basis, and especially with AI now, and all of that. I have contacted scores, hundreds of scientists, astronomers, archaeologists, etc. personally. And naturally, 99.9% of the time, I don't hear back. But if they discovered something that's consistent with the Urantia book, and they didn't discover it until after the Urantia book was printed in 1955, which we got a date timestamp to prove that, no question. I contact those individuals and congratulate them on their discovery, and and then say, "Oh, you might be curious of what the Urantia book says," and confirms what you just, what you came up with. Not most of the time, I'll never hear back, but I have heard back from a few, and one published a book. Yeah.
That's interesting. What they say? What was their opinion? And I'd love to hear that.
Oh, yeah. Well, one book, as an example, was The Garden of Ediacara. The Garden of Ediacara, published by Columbia University Press,
Okay.
Professor Mark McMinimum. And I mentioned I congratulated him on what he found and discovered south of Tucson. And again, I never hear back from those people, folks, normally, those scientists, but he wrote that book and he never told me about it. Actually, he emailed me back and he said, "JJ, can you confirm that the 1980 something printing is the same as the 1955?" So I said I could confirm that. Yes, it was published in 1955. And not only that, part 3 and part 1 and 2 was indicted and put into the English language in 1934, and part 3 was 1935. And then I forgot about it because I never heard back. Years later, he writes this book, Columbia University Press, and he devotes 10 pages to the Urantia book. And
Really?
one of the things he brings up, Santiago, is he says, how can some precocious book from some dark corner know about the Precambrian supercontinent before we even discovered it? He was humble. He acknowledged it. He says, and I invited him to the flag conference, Flagstaff, back when they were having a conference. He says, well, I can't become a proselyte for Urantia, but I wish them all the best. And he mentions my name.
Yeah.
He says, J.J. Johnson turned me on to the book, etc. So anyway, that was just so beautiful to hear years later. And he didn't even, I discovered it from someone else in the Urantia community, Matthew Block, and you may have heard of him, what he does. He's got secondary sources that were, matched up with the things in the Urantia book. And he discovered that Mark McMinimum, and then contacted a mutual friend who's a retired attorney who passed away years ago here in Phoenix. And he said, JJ, look at this. And that's how otherwise I don't know if I'd ever found it.
Yeah, it's in there. But this is something that's I think another point that's good. I mean, what we were just discussing and you presenting, the impersonal and personal qualities of God, and also the reconciliation that you're saying about deity and science, about religion and science. Because we've gone into a world, and this is something that I also learned from Peterson, before there was a lot of meaning, before science, before we got to rationalize everything, we got to our everyday life, we had meaning, it wasn't just data, go to work and come back home. So we kind of lost that. So how important that is, that we do not throw the baby with the bathwater when it comes to religion, I mean, in science, and that we reconcile religion and science.
We're getting back to that, like you said, and it's sad that happened over that period of time. A good example of that that's we can look positive towards, Santiago, is the Discovery Institute. Dr. Stephen Mayer, Intelligent Design. He wrote a bestseller, Return of the God Hypothesis.
Okay.
And this guy is articulate. He's got the credentials. He's got three letters to the right of his name, and he can go toe to toe with the hardcore scientists who reject the spiritual side. Excuse me. And he's making tremendous progress with the Discovery Institute, and he's getting a lot of people can check him out. He's got a lot of interviews, and he can really make a case. He provides 3 scientific examples concretely that he sums it up by saying that this shows that the best possible answer to evolution, there had to be an intelligent design.
Definitely.
And he gives 3 examples of that. And of course, with our Heavenly Father being outside of time and space, that the Urantia book coordinates that and gives us an explanation as how all that can happen. And so that's another good one.
Yeah, this is really good in how we're going back to the premise of that this was intelligently designed, how this can be a fluke or how this can be an accident. It just goes beyond, once you know everything. And I think it's really important that it's not, we kind of always think when you don't know how an industry works, you could just see the storefront. It's very simple, and we kind of see the spiritual or the universal administration as something very simple, just God sitting there and just ruling us things. But there is such a vast array of beings, of functions, of levels of coordination throughout the universe, and it's not just we're just sitting there idly. We're participating, we're all contributing, we're all being part of that. So this is something that's also so important once you realize it and once you understand, the dimensions that we interact with so many beings and the administration of all this universe, that it just, you become awed by it. I don't know your opinion on this.
No, I agree. We're in the same sheet of music. Science and religion are not 2 antagonistic views of reality. They are views of 2 aspects of one reality. And as we discussed, the personal nature and the impersonal nature of God. And that's what an epical revelation like the Urantia book does. It just so happens that the current epical revelation that we have, the Urantia book, is in written form. Jesus, of course, was an epical revelation, and along with Adam and Eve and the Sage of Salem, Melchizedek, and another, the first one, Dalmatian Teachings, which what the Urantia book does. It brings us up to speed on on the other epical revelations that we receive distorted and some not at all, brings it up current with you'll be like a cow chewing its cud. That's what I always believe. That makes sense. So it just resonates. Like the Adam and Eve, they cleared that up. It wasn't the apple in the tree; it was the pear on the ground. But they cleared all that stuff up in a way that it's consistent with truth, beauty, and goodness. And we have available, each and every one of us within us, the gift to be able to draw upon our own personal spiritual insight. And like you said, with all the help around us, we can gain that insight, but we still have free will. So if it makes sense and it resonates and the truth bells go off, then it's something that those that have discovered the Urantia Book and active are.
Yeah, and it's important. I mean, what you're saying, if it rings a bell, that discernment that everybody has, and that's something that, I mean, I've been in my spiritual quest and reading the UB and I mean for many a long time, 26 plus years. But it's really important when people start to open or break from that cocoon or that shell, that they do use discernment. That they do not limit themselves or their free will or their connection with God to somebody else. I mean, you have that personally, that is yours, and always keep that and always use that as your compass. I mean, because it doesn't matter what you say, what I say, as long as what they have inside of them is always pointing them in the right direction.
Yes, beautifully said. I agree wholeheartedly. The Urantia Book or the Urantia Revelation, I sometimes refer to it as my spiritual GPS. You can
Mm-hmm.
rely on it. You're going down, and if we drift into material things, it's a rocky, and we get back on it, and it resonates within us. And like you said earlier, Santiago, when you're asked someone to close their eyes and you touch them, and they say, "Well, you feel it, don't you?" And they mention because of a personal experience, it lets us know that we should have a spiritual experience that's so personal and so sublime that it can be realized and expressed only by feelings that lie too deep for words. We have to live it out,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Exactly.
what happens.
Well, I mean, this is very simple. I mean, a very simple example. But when you see the two couple of lovebirds, young lovebirds, they don't talk. They just, they just stick together, and that's it. And that is love, and that's a very crude or simple example. But that's what it is. It doesn't need words because the emotions and the feelings that flow through that are beyond words. And that's, I think, part of what the experience that you had in 22 years old, that was wordless. There wasn't any dialogue, but you had, so much information that was shared, I believe.
Yeah, it's the personal, the real, the Urantia revelation it's not a religion, but it is a religious revelation of epical significance. But it's the personal communion with God that we have, each and every one of us, that resonates and validates, and then
Yeah.
we can layer that and complement it with an epical revelation to bring in the details that we haven't experienced yet. I mean, we don't know where we're going after we die, but the way an epical revelation like the Urantia Book presents it, it brings it all together. Our soul growth, the spiritual becoming, ascending more spiritual, and those kinds of
Yeah.
things. It just answers those kinds of questions, but it does it in an authoritative way, but not in a way where it says do this or do that. We still arrive at our own personal insight as we're reading along.
I like that you brought this word. I like that word that you use, authoritative, because that's what happened to me when I first heard the first UB quote. In my story, and we'll talk about it later, but in my story, when I discovered it, I was in a workshop, in a sacred geometry workshop, and we were encouraged to bring, part of the workshop was to share, meditate, do different stuff. And somebody read a quote from the Urantia Book. I don't remember exactly what it was, but to me, that was one of the words that I used to qualify it. It was loving, it was authoritative, and it was like you said, it was authoritative but not denying. And that's, I've been trying to find the word to explain it, but you're saying it, not denying your free will. Establishing a fundamental truth, unmutable truth. uh, in such a loving way and in such an explanatory fashion that, just blew my mind in how that was written, you know?
Yeah, that was very real for you. I can appreciate how exciting and just put you on fire there. The uh, and that free will is a biggie. Exactly. Our Heavenly Father on paradise and Jesus, our Creator Son of our universe, we have free will, finite free will. And they're not going to give it, they're not going to bestow free will upon us on within our personality and then take it away from us. So even the indwelling spirit that indwells us, that divine spark, that silent voice that speaks within, cannot coerce us. We have to, it's required, respecting our free will, to have that desire to become godlike. But once we have that desire, and again, all of those that are listening to you on your podcast here are sincere and searching for truth. Once they continue to search in that and with that sincerity, that's when the divine fragment can give spiritual
Yeah.
insight, because it's respecting the free will. So it all comes together in a beautiful
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. So beautiful, beautifully put. And how perfect, this is one of the things, the takeaways that I get from all this, how perfect in its structure and its execution, the limits, or how, no, I don't want to say limits because it's limitless, but how it delineates, the interaction between all of us and our ways forward in evolution and attaining God, which is what we're all doing. So it's really interesting, and I really appreciate you sharing all of this, and for people that are in this path and looking for truth, that they find these truths and that they read them from themselves. It's not just you and me or anybody else telling them, but that they can really go into that and find this experience and live this experience themselves, right?
Yes, the Urantia book, or the Urantia revelation, is not a mere revelation of facts. It's an epical revelation of truth, and that's what we talked about earlier: the personal and the impersonal nature of God. It's the truth of reality, and there's no comparison. There's no other written source available on our planet that provides this approach in a personal, loving way that will be consistent with someone that's searching and resonates with their own personal experience.
And I love what you said in a personal, loving way, because this never takes away from you. And this is what is always good. And I always mention this is not that you have to do away. This is on the contrary. This is just more information for you to expand your understanding and perception of understanding of God and perception of divine realities. So this is what it's all about. Awesome, JJ. I mean, I can keep on going for forever. I mean, there's so many things to talk about, and we'll probably have more shows together, because there's a lot of things to unpack. Then, and I really love the way that you framed and you explained things for our audience. So thanks a lot for everything. And before we go, this is our closing part. Anything that you want to point out, suggest, or comment to our audience?
Well, again, thanks for sharing your podcast with me, and I love listening to your interviews, and because everyone loves a story. And oh, by the way, speaking of stories, I don't know if you've heard of How I Found the Urantia Book by Saskia. Are you familiar with that one?
No, no, no.
367 inspiring true stories. Saskia has accumulated. This is like her second
Okay.
edition, and a lot of them are from Spain and from South America, and they told their personal story, and she was able to compile all of those. And there's 367s in How I Found the Urantia Book, just like
Oh,
the story
nice.
I told, except it's their own personal story, which I
Nice,
love.
nice,
I love stuff like that.
nice.
And
That's pretty nice.
the other one, The Invention of Sacred Tradition.
Okay.
This is published by Cambridge University Press. Mark McMenamin was Columbia. So these are different uh, people who are not they're not familiar with they're not students of the Urantia book. They just do academic write-ups on things that they've discovered. One about Scientology, the Urantia
Mm-hmm.
book on Mormonism, and all of those Latter-day Saints.
Uh-huh.
And so one professor out of the UK, she wrote a 10-page regarding the Urantia book as an independent academic write-up. And she says at the end of her 10 pages in the invention of sacred tradition, she's been following over the shoulder the Urantia community all these years.
Mm-hmm.
So her contribution in that book, The Invention of Sacred Tradition, she gives all kinds of examples, automatic handwriting, this and that, but at the end she says, the Urantia book cannot be proved or disproved. The people have to discover it for themselves because it's so recent. It was published in 1955. This is not something that was
Not even 100 years.
Right. So they can validate these things. So she says, she's very academic about it, and she's very honest. It's the best write-up I've ever seen from someone that gives an honest review of and not taking into account personal experiences and those kind of things. And it's very positive.
I mean, there's a lot of things that you just pointed out, and I'll have to check out. But I like the one about the stories of how they found the Urantia book. Like, as we say, how did the book find you instead of how did you find the book, right? Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks a lot, JJ. It's been really a pleasure. And like I said, we're gonna plan more of these conversations and share more with our audience.
Yeah, just if you have enough time, did I mention my book that I came out with?
Yes, please do so. I forgot about that. At least, please tell us.
I wrote a secondary works to the Urantia book. It's exploring the Urantia revelation, bridging science and spirit with the truth of reality, like I would discuss the truth of reality. But it's published by Skyhorse and distributed by Simon & Schuster, one of the big 5 distributors, goes throughout globally. And I had a book signing in Barnes & Noble, the big bookstore here in the U.S. So it's one of those, if you have that kind of curiosity, you can go on Amazon, check it out. And it's in 3 formats, hardcover, audio. They did an audio book plus the Kindle.
Awesome. Yeah, please repeat the name, and we'll put that in the information as well, the link and the title.
Exploring the Urantia revelation. Bridging science and spirit with the truth of reality. And what I did, Santiago, was I told my story, what we just discussed briefly in the beginning, to make it more personal. And then some of the experiences I had with the U.S. State Department over the years.
Yeah, I think personal stories are very important, like you said. Yeah, who doesn't love a good story? And I think that's where we make the human touch points, where we can relate and understand, how somebody reacts and lives certain things and how we can relate to those. So it's really important that we have those personal stories. And yours is a very interesting one, JJ. I really enjoyed what you shared.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. And to all of you that watch this, thank you for joining us and watching. Remember that if you like what you're hearing, to tell people out there, maybe they can find something in our conversations as well. And remember always, if you like the content, to like, share, and subscribe. And I'm Santiago Kneeland. Take care. This is the Divine Within, and Carpe Diem. On the Divine Within podcast, we share real conversations to help you find a personal connection with God. My goal is to support your faith, growth, and journey toward discovering the divine within yourself. Join us to deepen your faith and spiritual journey.